All right, so look, guys, the final shape is being received pretty well, but there is this one huge issue that a lot of players are extremely upset about right now. The other thing is, this issue actually didn't seem to be in the patch notes, to my knowledge. Like, I looked in the patch notes, I couldn't find any mention of this thing, and that just made it even worse, because when players got into the game, they discovered this change, and it was like, oh, well, you didn't even talk about this in the patch notes, and this really sucks. So that honestly just was adding fuel to the fire. These changes are actually 3 different changes, but they're all closely related, so it kind of makes sense to group them all into one, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. So the first change is there is now a -5 power modifier that is being applied to all dungeons and all normal mode raids. And this is a huge difference from what it was before, because it used to be +20 and now it's -5. So there's a 25 power level difference that just instantly went into effect into the raids. The second thing is that surges have been added to raids as a way to kind of compensate for this. So if you have a solar weapon and you have your solar surge or whatever, you're going to deal 25% more damage, but the 25% added damage does not actually combat the 30% loss in your damage that you will get from the -25 power level. Sorry if that's all confusing, but basically raids are just going to be more difficult now, no matter what, even if you are using the surges. Another thing that was kind of sneakily included in this patch was a raid boss health buff, but it only applies to certain bosses. So yeah, certain bosses are just going to be much more tanky and take way longer to defeat, which is not exactly a popular thing, especially for normal mode raids. The top post here over on Reddit says, the changes to normal mode raids and dungeons make them way less accessible to new players and annoying to veterans. I think this is a good way to sum it up in the title here. The way that it impacts veterans is you won't be able to defeat the bosses as rapidly on normal, and you also won't really be able to do low mans / speed runs as well as you could in the past, because the bosses are just going to be randomly more tanky. The other reason why veterans are upset about this is the surge is going to force them to use a very specific build on a certain week. So you can't just be like, oh, I'm going to use my solar build. Oh wait, actually, I have to wait 3 weeks until solar is on rotation. It's forcing you to use very certain elements. And the thing is you're kind of throwing if you're not using those certain elements, because with this new change, the bosses have more health and you're now 25 power worse than you were before. So you're going to be doing basically trash damage if you're not using the surge that is selected for that week. So that's why it's really been an upsetting change for veterans. From the other perspective, from the perspective of the casuals / the new player / the returning player, it's a bad change for these people because raids are already a pretty high barrier to entry. There's a lot of people who get into the game and they just never do a raid. Like, you'd be shocked. It's a really high percentage of people just never do a raid, or they do like one raid. But the truth is just it's really hard to get a group of 6 people together if you don't know anybody and you don't want to LFG for whatever reason. So raids are already a barrier to entry for new players to begin with, but now the raids just got harder on the lowest difficulty. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for having difficult stuff, but making the easiest raids super hard is not the way to do it. You need more difficulty options. You need more selectable difficulties so that the people who want to challenge themselves can actually put themselves through that intentionally by selecting a harder difficulty. It's not a good move to make the easy stuff, the lowest level stuff, really hard. Like, that would be like going into a patrol and making patrols -20 power or something, you know? Like, nobody wants patrols to be brutally difficult. People just want to have a variety of difficulty options within the game. They want some stuff to be easy, some stuff to be medium, and some stuff to be hard. Continuing on with this Reddit post, we have, as of the final shape, all normal raids will have -5 power and given surges to offset the power difference. Now, I said -25, and that's because it was up to +20 before, so a total of 25 difference from what we previously had. Not only this, but as highlighted in this tweet here, several bosses have their health increased to be a little bit more in line with modern raids. I mean, it said change, but it's increased. So this tweet says, not only did they nerf us with the -5 and add surges that don't even make up for the power loss, but they actually buffed several bosses to just have an insane amount of health now. Like, Kali has 15 million health now, more than Nezrak did. Caretaker has 30 million, more than Master did. And Templar has 10 million, more than Master did. And these are just the ones I've seen be tested. After the day one, when the honeymoon phase is over and people go back to the old raids, people are going to get a rude awakening. It seems that this isn't even an exhaustive list. Like, there will probably be several other bosses added to this where they just have their health randomly increased for no reason, in addition to the other changes, making normal mode just take a whole lot longer for everyone involved. Raids as a whole just became much less accessible, and unfortunately, I think low mans are going to be in the same spot they were a few years ago, when they be an exclusive thing that not everyone can do, and it hurts to say that. A good selectable hard mode was always the answer, not what this is. Yeah, I mean, I talked about it before. A selectable harder mode is definitely the correct answer, rather than just making the lowest level raid super challenging. But I wanted to dive in here with a comment on my video about the solo player experience. The game has evolved to a point where I feel like if I don't have an exact build with all the correct fragments and mods, or an exact roll on a gun, I'm going to be kicked. Also, I just have major social anxiety about hopping in with people I don't know. See, this is the issue. There are many people like this person. There are many people who just don't do a raid. And it's for these types of reasons. Even if they have, hundreds of hours in the game, even if they've played this game for years, there are many other comments on this video where it's like, oh yeah, I've played since 2014. I've done one raid. I've done no raids. And it doesn't make any sense to make the easiest difficulty harder, because then you're just screwing these people who are already struggling to do raids in the first place. And for veteran players who perhaps just want to get an easy clear for their chance at an exotic, they're just going to be sitting at the boss for 3 times longer than usual because he now has so much health. Back with our Reddit post here, he continues with, firstly, the -5 power difference. This just makes the easiest point of access for a new player that wants to start raiding and raises their bar dramatically. Already a lot of players do not raid, so why would you do this? I can see a future where way less newbies want to start raiding just because of this change. Yeah, exactly what I was just talking about. On top of this, any veterans trying to speedrun or low man are screwed over too. There's a healthy community for both of these, which will now be lifeless, as bosses will either take way longer to kill than before or be impossible in low mans. But wait, what about the surges? Well, firstly, the power difference by the surges isn't even made up for fully. Having 25% increase for a certain element does not make up for the -25 power. And even if it did, being locked to 1 or 2 elements per week, and it is locking, you are throwing if you are missing out on the 25% damage, is not fun or exciting way to play raids. Don't even get me started on dungeons. Ghost of the Deep took me 9 phases on the final boss, now probably 20, lol. Yeah, so that boss in particular has a notoriously huge health pool. It's extremely chonky. And yeah, now with these changes, now with the power difference and the surge requirements, it's going to take even longer. And when that first came out, I remember one of the major complaints was like, oh my gosh, this boss just has too much health. People were just sitting there and, going through 20 million damage phases just trying to get through the boss. And it was a major complaint because it was just boring. Like, you can master the mechanics and still wipe just because you have to do it so many times that eventually you mess up. And that's not really fun. The fun part is doing the mechanics and having excellence in your gameplay of the mechanics and mastery over them. But just doing the same mechanics 20 times in order to get through the boss fight is just monotonous and extremely repetitive and boring. All the players over on Twitter here was one of the ones who first discovered this. He said, surges in normal raids, surely not for contest. Yeah, if it is in contest, that's going to completely change the game, and not in a good way, because it's going to force people to only use certain builds, and then they won't even be able to use the best builds in the game for the contest mode raid. And the raid race, I mean, right? I mean, they're the same thing, but like, that makes no sense. I mean, you should be able to use the builds that you actually want to use in contest. Like, come on. I understand. I mean, the purpose of surges in general is to encourage players to mix up their loadouts and use different things in different activities and not just always use the same thing. And I guess that makes sense for some activities, but In raids, especially in competitive raids, you want to be able to play how you want to play. You don't want to be forced into doing a certain thing. It's kind of acceptable in lower level activities, because if you don't use the surge, you can still kind of get away with it and just do fine in a lower level activity. But in a raid, you really need to be as optimized as you can. And therefore, in the raids, it's just much more of a requirement because they are harder and more endgame activities. From Aegis here, he says, I'm all for new challenging modes like Pantheon and the introduction of cool modifiers into top level activities, but no one asked for rotating surges on normal difficulty raids. Many players find raids and dungeons loadout restrictive enough. Now we're adding more? Why? To be clear, if we are in fact -5, we are losing 35% overall damage, only recovering 25% if you choose to play with the surges. I want more people to enjoy raids and dungeons. I love challenges, but this just raises the barrier of entry for no reason. Please consider a revert. So yeah, guys, to sum it up, if you're a new or inexperienced person who hasn't done a ton of raids, it's just much harder to get into raids now. And if you're a veteran player, raids are now really restrictive on your loadout, and they're just less fun and more annoying. So that is why many people are extremely mad about this change. Please subscribe to the channel because this channel is still new and needs to gain a lot of subscribers. And until next time, thank you so much for watching.